make sure I got a, oops. There we go. Yeah, there we go. That was weird. Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Ma'am, attention please, all quiet please, thank you. Go ahead and take your notes out so that we have those ready to go. We're going to be getting into World War I, the origins and causes of a really big war among people who just gosh, they just can't get along. And it's not like you can just have a vote and everyone agree. Shh. Agree to disagree. Shh. Yeah. So needless to say, those of you guys who put your predictions in, I got lots of those turned in, which is good. Some people, I was getting them yesterday after school emailed to me. Just make sure to print those off because it's much easier for me when the time comes and I have really solid information as to who actually won in all the various different places. Then I can just take them out and go whoop, 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 and assign the points. My deadline is the end of the semester, which for you guys is in January. Right? Ugh, yeah. After Christmas break, we have 3 more weeks. All right? So. Uh-huh. No, it's 3. 3 is more than 1. Okay? Yeah. Oh, I don't know. Sometime next year. It is in June. No, it's for you guys, the last day of school is June 10th. Hello? It's a different kind of year, isn't it? All right, so just very, very quickly, I was up late last night getting the results, and the results are 100% in for Ada County. Okay, my brother won. So that was good. Yeah, we were happy about that. And my daughter was really happy about that because she was his campaign manager, and so she was really nervous about oh, he's going to blame me if he loses. No. So, but it's very close. I always talk about your vote matters. And when you guys turn 18, you need to vote. Take the time, pay attention, make sure you vote properly, legally, whatever voting methods are available. If you can vote early, you can do that. You can vote absentee, you can vote on the election day. Pay attention to what the rules are, follow the rules, vote. Because every vote counts. I've told you the story probably about my Uncle Reed, who lost a primary election by 5 votes. I was reminded of that because in the Ada County Highway District, there's 5 commission races. My brother won his. There were 2 others that were being contested this year, and one of them, the difference was 2 votes. 2 votes. So my uncle, they did a recount for 5 votes, because that happens when you get really close elections. You have a recount. And then you go through, and in my uncle's case, they took all of the ballots, ran them through the computer again, and it came up the same. There was a 1 vote change in one precinct, and then it was another vote change in another precinct, but it ended up balancing it out. So I'm pretty sure that one Ada County Highway District race where there was a 2-vote margin at the end of it, there's going to do a recount, right? Because 3 votes change, you get a different result. We had recounts in the state of Florida in 2000. In 2000, recounts were in Florida. And, of course, then you had questions of, because every county did their ballot. We are a country that has federalism. We share power with the nation and the states. And within the states, they also have power sharing among the counties. So the elections are actually run very much by counties and sometimes cities, depending on how the state is organized. In Florida, they had all kinds of various different ballots, and some of them were kind of funky, and they had computer cards. I don't think anybody uses computer cards anymore. Computer cards, we used them in Idaho for a long time. Problem with a computer card, like a punch card, is sometimes if you don't punch it all the way through, the little piece of paper, anybody know what the little piece of paper is? It's supposed to fall off the computer card that registers that you have actually chosen that particular choice. It's called a CHAD. Everyone knew what a CHAD was. It's called a CHAD. In 2000, literally, they would have these cards, and you look at them and go, does this evidence voter intent if it was pushed, but not all the way through? Instead of having the 4 little hanging things, the connections of the thing, break through and the CHAD falls off, maybe it had a hanging CHAD. It was punched insufficiently so that only 2 of the 4 were broken off. Does that evidence a vote on the part of the voter? Or does that sort of go, oh, wait, check swing, like in baseball, if you know what I'm talking about? Oh, I didn't really mean to vote for that person. Or what if they were just like a really not so muscular, powerful voter, and they're like, I think I'm going to vote for them, and they just sort of goes, bink, right? They call those pregnant chads, right? So you could see a little bit of an indentation on the little piece of paper, but it wasn't enough to, although with pregnants, you either are or you aren't, okay? So it's like, how do we count those ones? Did it make a difference in Florida? Yes, because it was so close. I think there was like just several hundred votes difference between Bush and Gore. And they were recounting and recounting. So, I mean, they had the original count, and then they did the recount county by county by county by county. And then there was like, are we going to continue this? Shh. The Secretary of State, who's in charge of elections overall in Florida, ruled, by the way, she's a Republican, she ruled that the election recount was done, we weren't going to do another one. Okay, the Democrats obviously didn't like the result of that. I mean, depending on what the result is, it's like, you don't like the result, you challenge it. So they challenged it. It went all the way up to the Supreme Court. There literally was a case called Bush versus Gore. And it was about whether or not Florida's Secretary of State could say that the recounts were done. On a 5-4 vote, the Supreme Court said the Secretary of State in Florida had the authority and everything was fine, and so therefore the last result from Florida is the result. We knew that in December. So you guys weren't alive then. We're waiting on votes, okay? Every state has theirs different. Idaho, we've had the absentee system for a long time. If you want to vote ahead of time, you have to make sure to get your ballot mailed in by a certain time. Some states look at the postmark on when you mailed it in. Others look very strictly at when it arrives, and so you hope that your mail system actually works fine. Other people are like, if you ask for an absentee ballot and you're like, you put it off. Have you ever put something off? Yeah. Okay. So like you get an absentee ballot and you're like, oops, too late. And then you're like, well, I'm going to go do early voting. Oops, too late, because Friday was the last time for early voting. Then you just have to vote on Election Day. So depending on the rules of the state, it can be rather complicated. Just like Florida was really close in 2000, and so that state made the difference. Maybe one of these states that is lightly colored will make the difference in a very close race this time around. The one that everyone I think is probably looking at the closest is Pennsylvania, because apparently they had a rule that during the COVID situation, they're like, okay, we're going to allow for lots of early voting. Okay, so mail in the votes. But they also had a rule, which doesn't make sense to me, that you couldn't, on the county level, you couldn't actually count those up ahead of time, because that would really be efficient. So on Election Day, some of those counties were like, we're going to just get to those later. Others managed to get a bunch of them counted, and some of them maybe even got them all counted. But I mean, there's a lot of counties in Pennsylvania. That's why it's like 64 or whatever % of the vote counted in Pennsylvania. And there is a difference, because if you do surveys of the kind of voters who vote early versus the kind of voters who vote on the Election Day, which do Biden tend to do better on? Early voters, yeah. And Trump does better on the same day voters, okay? So that's why we're waiting on Pennsylvania. We're waiting on Michigan. We're waiting on Wisconsin. I think we're still waiting on Nevada, maybe Arizona, right? I mean, whether or not some news agency, whether it's AP or Fox News, says, Biden's got Arizona, you can't declare. Who declares whether or not a state has gone to a candidate? Not the Russians. No, not the news agencies. I mean, they tried to figure it out too. The states, the states declare that. Each county declares it for the county, and then they send the word back to the state, and then those states declare it. So we're waiting on that. If it's really close in a pivotal state, or 2, or 3, we could have recounts. And those will be set up. When my uncle had the recount, 5 votes, you would think it would be an automatic. No, it wasn't close enough, like percentage-wise. His campaign had to pay for the recount to bring in the people to do all the recounting and so forth. Depending on how the final vote is in some of those very, very close states, will determine. But, I mean, that's not an issue. I think the Trump campaign or the Biden campaign, if it would turn around the result, would pay for that. But frankly, most of the time it just means putting in the paper ballots and so forth through the machine again, and you get pretty much the same thing. The real question is legality of certain ballots. I don't think we use those. We don't have hanging chad issues anymore, or pregnant chads. But I'm sure there will be some other legal questions. So there you go. We'll keep an eye on it. But I was thinking it's kind of like, what about the ballots that haven't been counted in Pennsylvania? Well, you count them. I mean, if I were to say, okay, I'm going to give a prize to the person who does best on one of my tests. But after grading, I'm tired. I think I'm going to stop after grading the matching. Some of you guys are like, that's good. I always do really well in the matching part. And other people's like, no, you need to get to the true false. You have to grade everything to get the result. For these, you have to go by the rules of the states, and so some of the states like Pennsylvania are going to take a while. And I think they'll probably take the longest from what I gather, because it looks like the other states like Michigan and Wisconsin, Georgia and North Carolina, they've got a really, really high percentage of the ballots counted so far. I wouldn't be surprised, yeah. And depending on how close it is, then you get the question of whether or not there's going to be a recount. And that's a process, and it takes a couple of weeks. Because if you do a statewide recount, that's a lot of people to get together. You got to bring all the things together, and then you got attorneys, you got observers, you got everyone watching, and so forth. It's wild. Okay? Any thoughts, comments? Hopefully, and so far things are relatively calm, which is good. Yes. Yeah. How many presidential elections have we had? Lots of them. How many times have we actually had part of the country go, oh, I hate the result of that, I'm going to leave? Okay, that was 1860. Okay, when Lincoln was elected, that was 1860. And there have been some other tense times and so forth. But let's just hope that everything will be like moving through. Because, I mean, hello, is the president the only one who has political power in this country? No. We got a constitution. We got balance of power. Hello, we already talked about how the states have a lot of power. I mean, who is the authority to declare, like, I don't know, a quarantine in Idaho? The governor. Although the governor has said basically, yeah, let's let the local political districts make those decisions. So some of the locals are like, what? Who has the authority to determine whether or not, like this little political entity, North Star Charter School, has the, what the rules are going to be as far as like masks or remote learning or whatever? The board, in consultation with the administration and the parents and the teachers and students and so forth. So, I mean, talk about federalism. What?
Why is there always this board at school that just rule the students?
It's,
What are they? What are they doing?
they are elected.
Why did we get the vote for that?
Oh! Aren't you old enough? Actually, I've always thought it would be a good idea. How do you get a vote on the board? Raise your hand if you get a vote for members of the board. Me. Members of the staff do. Who else does? Parents do. And I've always thought it would make sense if, when you guys turn 18, that you would get to vote for members of the board. They don't have that in the charter. Frankly, by the time you get to be 18, you're typically in the senior year, and you're kind of almost out anyway. So they've never really added that onto it. Okay? Make a proposal to the board. We just have to amend the charter. I would be... I had students one year when I was teaching at Capitol, they're like, they wanted to change the law in Idaho so that 16-year-olds could vote, right? You know, here's the deal. I mean, you have to take government, you have to do all these different things, and so you're like, okay, fine, whatever. It got a hearing, a very positive hearing in one of the Idaho State legislative committees, but they ultimately were like, now you guys are smart and you're clever and we would be happy with you voting, but we don't feel that same level of confidence among all 16 and 17-year-olds. So they didn't pass it. Those students then, very soon, turned 18 and quickly forgot about it and became voters. So that's why. There's not too many places in the country that allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote. There's some countries, I think there's some European countries that are now allowing that for some of the elections. So, questions, comments? Let's keep an eye on that, shall we? Yeah, we'll keep a close eye on that. You guys know, next time you guys come in, which will be on Monday, we'll be doing the in-class essay. Everyone got that question? And you put together an outline. You can print it out. You can have it on your phone, whatever. We'll be handwriting that out on papers like this. Okay? You don't like the papers? You have to. It stresses you out? Actually, it is a little bit harder because how many of you guys are really good at handwriting and stuff? No, you guys are all adept at keyboard and stuff. But that's the way they do it. So this is why we need to not only calibrate you on how to write an essay, we have to calibrate you on handwriting, because that's how it gets turned in. And if they return the IB exam for history back the way it was, this year it's a little bit shorter because of COVID. But if you guys, senior year, if everything starts to turn normal, you're like, yay, things are normal. You're like, oh, I got a 2.5-hour handwriting exercise for history, 3 essays. Boom, ba-boom, ba-boom. And you're like, oh, my hand is sore. Yes? I will set up a civics test time with those of you who need to take it. Okay? So, what? Yeah, I put it in Power School. Yeah, they're in Power School. Yeah. Yeah. It's all good. It's all good. We'll get that set up because I want to have that plugged in too. All right, let's go ahead and stand for the pledge. Oh yeah, our country. Okay, ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Did we? Okay. At least everyone's doing it, so that's good. I appreciate that. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to keep an eye on this all day to see what happens on these other states. 95%. That's still very close. 94%. Yes. 94%. I don't think that's going to close. I don't think that's going to close. That's still too. That surprises me. Yeah. Come on, you guys. Come on, Nevada. Let's go. I mean, Idaho. Hello. 99%. We got ours counted. We have to count it. DC. Woo! Whoa, boy, howdy. Let's see, what is Trump's biggest? 63, 70, whoa. Utah, 58, 70, 65, 64. Wow. Texas was a lot closer. Alabama. So Idaho looks like they have the second highest percentage for Trump. Second highest. Oh, West Virginia. Whoa, 68. Kentucky's pretty high too. Indiana, So, South Carolina, okay. Yeah, the biggest one, D.C., looks like for that, but Biden's got some big victories on the East Coast. They're still counting them up. Yeah, they haven't counted it up. All right. Okay, let's turn our attention to war. Let's get off the peaceful subject of political differences, and let's talk about war. Okay, are you ready? All right. You got your notes out? All right, here we go. Okay. First thing I want to remind you. Okay, and I do believe last time we went through the the video showing kind of how things went. Right? So you had the Western Front. Was there a lot of movement ultimately on the Western Front? No. Why did Germany surrender? Hunger, hunger, hunger. Yeah, I mean they were basically starving. That was a big part of it. And the fact that the United States had just jumped into the war, and it's like Germany's like, great. Now the United States is not only supplying our enemies, they're actually sending over lots of troops as well. This is not going to go very well. We need to get out of this. We'll get the details of Germany quitting the war on the Western Front. But here's the thing. Of the 6 major countries in World War I, 4 of them were losers. Raise your hand if you can identify the 4 losers among the 6 major countries, certainly at the beginning of World War I. Not counting the United States, we'll say they're this way. Jeremiah, who were the big losers in World War I? Germany, good, check. Russia, check. Ottoman Empire and Austria-Hungary. Thank you, Jeremiah, for bouncing your voices through other students and so forth. Okay? So France and Britain won, and the United States won, but this is important. Just make a note of this. We'll see this actually play out. As much as people look back on World War I and go, that was terrible, don't want to have to go through that again, the people of Eastern Europe actually look back on that result and go, that turned out well. Because if you look at the map here, before the war, here is the border of Russia going right up to the border of Germany and Austria-Hungary. If you look at that same area of the map after World War I, or even today, you would see the existence of, write it down, lots of Eastern European countries. Poland is probably the best example. Poland had existed in the 1700s, but was carved up by Prussia, which became Germany, Austria, and Russia. They're basically like, hey, let's bully Poland. And they took it all over. I mean, literally, how many of you guys know if you have Polish ancestry? Okay? So when you do Polish ancestry things, you're like, well, why are the records in Austria? Or why are the records in Prussia? Or why are the records in Russia? Well, there's the answer. Because those countries controlled the Polish people, the Polish nation. There you go. And have you ever done any like looking back at any of the records and so forth of like where your ancestors were born?
Well, not directly where my ancestors were born. I know that my grandparents were both from Poland, and then the parents before that.
Do you know when they came over?
From Poland to Massachusetts.
Do you know generations? So did they come over in the 1800s or the 1900s? Early 1900s. Depending on when they come over. If they came over after World War I, they would have come over when Poland was actually a new country again. If they came over before that, they're still Polish, but their birth records and so forth are in the Russian government or the Austrian government or the Prussian or German government. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. Woohoo! The Baltic states come into existence after World War I. Finland comes into existence after World War I. And you're going to see Austria-Hungary break apart. So that's an interesting fact. So those countries actually look at that time period and go, this actually turned out pretty well for us. So it's not all bad news for everybody as far as World War I goes. But that fact of that going on there tells you something about some of the nature of World War I. I'm going to get into the origins of World War I. You ready? There's a drama. Drama, drama, drama. First, write this down. When we get to the end of World War I, there will be a treaty, Versailles Treaty, and Germany will be blamed for World War I. Yes, and the Germans are going, it's not all our fault. And most historians look and go, well, you know, the blame can be shared among many. Yes, I suppose maybe Germany did some things that are more, it's not like World War II. You know, World War II, you're like, who's to blame for World War II in Europe? Hitler. Yeah, Germany. Yeah, Hitler. He really deserves pretty much all the blame there. But Germany, it's a more complicated story. Okay? All right. So first of all, you have to kind of back it up to the fact that once upon a time, there was no Germany. Right? There was no Germany. There were lots of German people. Write it down. There were lots of German-speaking people in Central Europe. Austria had a bunch of German-speaking people. Switzerland's got a bunch of German-speaking people. You've got German-speaking people going all the way up to the Baltic and North Sea and all the way down to the Swiss border and through Austria. Lots of German-speaking people. And they were never really unified into one big country until 1871. And which of the German-speaking countries is going to take the lead in unifying other German-speaking parts and bits and pieces? Prussia. Prussia is the northern German-speaking area. They're going to be the big one, and they're going to go, hey, you guys, let's join on up together. And most of them, in fact, are going to go, okay, sure. Like these, on this map, Prussia is the blue area. And they've been growing over time. Through marriage and war and so forth, they've been growing. Of these little bits and pieces and so forth were like, remnants from, the Middle Ages. Because if you looked at the map, say in 1400 or 1500, You would not see one big blue area in the north. You would see lots and lots and lots of different areas. Germany had never been unified really before. In fact, a lot of the Germans are like, let's not get unified. You know who actually really did something to get the German people in the 1800s to think, we ought to unify? I mean, seriously, we ought to unify. The answer? Napoleon. Napoleon, in charge of the French military forces, conquered like most all of Europe. I mean, Napoleon ultimately attacked Russia. That didn't work out, and so he lost everything. But Napoleon's going through conquering all these German-speaking areas and going, Vive la France, we love France. And the Germans are like, we like our nation too. And why are we getting beaten up by a large French army? In the 1800s, more and more German speakers were going, we need to have, for our own strength and security, we need to have one country. And who did they ultimately find that would lead them in that goal of one united German nation? No, not Hitler. No. I mean, that'll come later. That'll come later. Hitler will be like, I want to get this back and this back and this back and this back. And oh, these areas, well, let's just clear them out, you know, and put Germans in there. Whoa. I remember it's like when I was in college, I lived one of my years at the German house. It was one of the dorms. And it was like, hey, I'm on campus. It's cool. And we shared actually the building with the French house. And one of the things we had on the common area was on the wall was a map of, this was West Germany and East Germany at the time during the Cold War. One of the residents, he got out his paintbrush and he added back bits of German-speaking areas and created a greater Germany. He put Alsace, Lorraine back, and you're like, what the heck? Anyway, I'll tell you about that. He added the Austrian areas of Germany and so on. The French, yeah, the French house, which is right next door, they came over and like, no. So needless to say, some people are very sensitive about the idea of having all German speakers in one country. Write this down. All German speakers in one country is a very big country. If that happens, it can change European history. Oh, and by the way, and it did, yeah. It did, because Germany's a big deal. Very big deal. In fact, one thing you need to write about when Germany comes together, in fact, even before that, Prussia is industrialized. Therefore, when Prussia becomes Germany, it's industrialized. We've already told you this. Is Germany able to fight World War I for many, many years on two different fronts? Yes. How? They were industrialized. Now, were they able to pull it off ultimately? No. Okay? The man who ultimately is going to agree that Germany should be created and Prussia should take the lead is the king, Wilhelm I. Write that down. Wilhelm I, or William I if you want to use the English way of saying it. He's like, let's do this. Let's do this. By the way, he's the father of somebody you got to know in the video, Wilhelm II. Okay? Yeah, we'll get to Wilhelm II. Yeah, here's Wilhelm II with a very recognizable mustache and the very sympathetic injured left arm, I think it was, that was damaged in child delivery. You guys remember that from watching the video? You're like, yes, I watched the video, Mr. Henson. That's what I was supposed to do, and I did. And so I'm very well informed. Okay, so, but write this down. The king is all-powerful, but he's also smart because he has hired a very, very capable man to head up his government. Write this man's name down. It is Otto von Bismarck. He holds the title of Chancellor. Now, in those days, the Chancellor served at the pleasure of the king. Today, the Chancellor is the leader of the most major party or party coalition in Germany. Anybody know the name of the Chancellor of Germany today? Her name is Angela Merkel. You would look at it and go, Angela. It's Angela Merkel. Okay?
Since 2005.
No, you don't need Supreme Chancellor Palpatine or anything like that. No, I mean, it's Angela Merkel, Chancellor. All right, so So think of, when we go through this, the details and so forth, it's going to be Bismarck, Bismarck, Bismarck. We're going to give him most of the credit. Well, we'll give, Wilhelm credit for like hiring the smart guy. And Bismarck is very smart. Here's the deal. He knows that if Germany is going to be created, it's going to create some potential enemies among the big countries. And so Bismarck, write this down, he wheels and deals and maneuvers all kinds of different things so that Germany can be created and the other countries won't stop it. Well, who are the other countries that might justifiably be nervous about the creation of a big German nation in every European country? But here's how he does it. He takes them one at a time. First, write it down, Austria. Here's how they handle Austria. Okay, because Austria is initially not that thrilled about this new big Germany coming into existence. They're actually in a war in the mid-1860s, and Prussia, which is what it was called before it became Germany, Prussia beat Austria big time in that war. Major reason why Prussia defeated Austria? Exactly, yeah. Prussia's army benefited from having Prussia being industrialized. So they had more weapons, better fire, better range, better accuracy, that kind of stuff. So, but here's the key thing. Bismarck made sure that there was no real animosity after the war. Some of the best friends the United States has today, and have for quite some time, are countries we were in fierce war with during World War II. We were very close allies with Germany and Japan and Italy. 3 countries we were at war with in World War II. Write this down. Austria and Prussia will become friends after the war's over. How do you do that? Well, things like you don't make the loser pay for the cost of the war. Great. You don't make the loser hand over a bunch of territory. You just sort of like hit them, boom, down they go, and you offer a hand and go, we're going to get along really well from here on out. And in fact, write this down. Prussia, who will become Germany, and Austria, as we know, are going to be allies from this point forward. In fact, honestly, maybe Germany shouldn't be an ally with Austria because, as we'll see, Austria is going to drag them into all kinds of problems that are going to drag Germany into wars like, really? Why are we fighting over that? Okay, fine, whatever. I mean, have you ever had a good friend or so forth that you're like, I don't know if this friendship's really worth it. I'm being dragged into a lot of drama and a lot of grief and a lot of, So that's kind of Germany, because Germany's going to get dragged into some stuff. Okay? All right. Another country that would be concerned about this is Russia. Write it down. Russia should be concerned about like this bigger, growing power just off to the west. And in fact, in World War I, Russia's going to lose to Germany. In World War II, Russia's going to be like beaten up by Germany, but ultimately survive. So how do the Russians not try and stop this? Basically, Bismarck, kind of sweet talks them and so forth, and is like, yeah, this isn't going to be a problem, this and this something, and so forth. Anyway, the Russians are like, okay, fine, yeah, we'll just stay out of this. So Russia stays out. Russia is not going to involve one way or another as far as like Germany being created as a country. All right, let me see. That's Austria's gone. Don't worry about the Turks. We'll figure those guys. They're not that big of a deal, honestly. Certainly not in the European situation. So let me see. Who else? Oh, the British. Here we go. The British. Should the British be concerned about this creation of Germany? I mean, I suppose they should be a little bit nervous because Britain was the #1 industrial economy in the world and in Europe in 1850. But by 1900, guess which country had surpassed it in Europe? Germany. Yeah, Prussia / now Germany, with the additional of some more territories there. So Britain should be a bit nervous about it. But Britain, write this down, Britain was like, I don't know if we really want to get that involved in what's going on in Europe. I don't know if you guys remember, there was a war Britain and France jumped into to help Turkey against like Russia, the Crimean War. And the British won, but they got kind of spanked pretty hard. And a lot of British public opinion. You have to pay attention to public opinion if you've got a democracy. And Britain does. So does France. And if the public's like, why are we fighting this war? This is not really good. Britain's very much like, let's not get involved in European wars. Write that down. Let's not get involved in European wars. And Bismarck cinched it because Bismarck made it clear to the British. They did not get involved. They did not want to get involved. So Britain's going to stay out of it. And here's the deal. Here's the thing that cinched it. Bismarck's like, don't be afraid of a new, larger Germany. It's not like we'll compete with you and so forth economically, but, here's the thing. You, Britain, have an empire around the world. Write it down. Bismarck said to Britain, we, Germany, have no desire for an empire. Write that down. No desire for an empire. And frankly, by that time in history, most of the areas that Europeans could take over, they had taken over. Like Africa, the pink bits, those are the British. Australia, New Zealand, India, Canada was still kind of sort of under the control of British, sort of. And the French had been very active. They got a lot of African parts, Southeast Asia, bits and pieces in the Pacific. So Bismarck promised Britain, don't worry about this. We're not going to try and be a rival of yours. Okay. So what was the only country that really was like finally stood up and said, this could be a problem because we don't really want a big Germany right on our border? France, write it down. France was the only country that really stood up against the creation of a Germany. And there was a war, 1870, 1871, the Franco-Prussian War. They're in Europe. I mean, there's a lot of wars with a lot of people in history. Okay? So here's the deal. Here's the deal. Franco-Prussian War. And actually, Bismarck was clever on this too. Because he knew he was going to have to go to war with France. Because France was going to object to having all of these southern German-speaking areas right on the French border be part of a larger German nation. So France obviously objected. So here's where Bismarck, he just really pulled this off. He did one of these. He's like, he didn't want other Europeans to jump into the war to defend poor, innocent, victimized France. So he was just sort of like ding, 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 ding to the French. And then the French go, pow, right? Have you ever done that with older siblings? You cause the problem, you cause the fight, and then you're like, Mom! And you're the innocent one. Or maybe it's the younger siblings. How many of you guys have younger siblings that are able to pull that off? Right? Exactly. And so you can't retaliate. Bismarck literally, he would take the communication written by his boss to the French, emperor at that time, and take out all the really nice words and make it a lot less diplomatic. And the French emperor, he had it figured out. The French emperor was like, I am so mad. Who declared war first in the Franco-Prussian War? Yeah. Who declared war in the Franco-Prussian War? France declared war. And everyone else stayed out of it. And this war could have gone either way. This is a big war, but, write this down, it's quick. And sometimes when something happens and you're like, oh, well, the next war is going to be quick too. We'll be home by Christmas. Yeah. You got two industrialized countries, France and Prussia. They're on the border regions, and they're hammering it out with each other. But then ultimately, almost like a wrestling match and so forth, they're getting boom, 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 and then somebody, one of the countries, gains an advantage, a decisive advantage. They punch a hole through the enemy lines. And when you punch a hole through the enemy lines, oh my gosh, you got a huge advantage because now you can outflank them. They're like all over the place. That's what happened. Write it down. In the Franco-Prussian War, the Prussians managed to break through the French lines. Critical stage, early in the war, and they won it. They took their troops all the way to Paris. They won it. France lost. France is mad. And especially because of what happened after. Are you ready? France is mad. They want revenge. Here's two things in particular that the French looked at as a result of that war, and they're like, we're going to get you someday, Germany. Here's one part. You ready? There were some territories along the French-German border. They're actually in France. Alsace and Lorraine. Make sure you write those in your notes. Those are two territories. And because they're kind of border region territories, The people who live there, do they speak French? Oui. Do they also speak German? Yeah. That means yes in both situations, okay? So, yeah, I mean, it's like that's where they live. They can communicate with Germans. They can communicate with the French. That's really cool, except now Germany's like, we want that territory. Write it down. They take it. Germany takes the border regions of Alsace and Lorraine. Which, by the way, if you went there today, what country would you be in? What do you think? France got it back. It's like, who won the last major war between France and Germany? You're like, well, let me see. Germany conquered France in 1940, but the United States and Britain and Canada and so forth liberated France, and France got it back. Here's another thing that really irritated the French about the Franco-Prussian War. You ready? Some of you guys who know sports analogies and so forth will really get this. Okay? So, the Germans crowned their ruler. Instead of Prussian king, he will now be the German emperor. Or in German, they will call him Kaiser. And where did they hold the ceremony? They held it at one of the most magnificent royal palaces in Europe, at Versailles. They held it in France. It's almost like you have a victory celebration on the emblem of the team that is hosting the game. Can you imagine? Yeah, it's kind of like, you're just like, you know, you play a game and the home team loses, and here you are right in the middle of the court or the basketball court or the football field or whatever it is, and you're having a dance and you're like, you suck. It's kind of what the Germans did here. French aren't too happy about it. Got it? So the French are like, we're going to get you. And of course, here's the deal. You know, Bismarck's like, don't worry, Britain. Don't listen to the French. We're not going to mess with your empire. Don't worry about that. It'll be cool. And everything was cool. I mean, here's the deal. Write this down. Bismarck helped to create a Emperor's League, the Three Emperors League. Write that down. The Three Emperors League. It's in your notes. It's a military alliance between three emperors. Germany, Austria, and Russia. They're emperors. They're not democracy. You know, their kings really are kings. They're rulers. Russia. Okay? So Russia was part of a military alliance with Germany and Austria at that time. And, you know, here's France like, I'm going to get vengeance. I'm going to get vengeance. I mean, what could possibly undo Bismarck's carefully laid plans to create a Germany and have most of the other European countries, like, go along with it? His boss could die. When Wilhelm I died, in comes Wilhelm II. And he sees things different. Write it down. Wilhelm II is younger. Bismarck is much older. Wilhelm II's like, I want a big, powerful Germany. And Bismarck's like, that's what you have. Don't mess it up. And literally, like, Wilhelm II's like, well, okay, boomer. I mean, seriously, he's like, you don't know these things. I know what we need. You know what we need? We need an empire. Write it down. Wilhelm II wanted an empire. Because his granny had an empire. Queen Victoria of England. His granny had a navy. His granny had possessions all over the place. Now, granny, it's the British and whatever, so forth. And Bismarck's like, no, no, no. That's going to just irritate the British. It's like, oh, it would be fine. And he got tired of listening to Bismarck and goes, you're fired. He did. Write it down. He fired Bismarck. Or retired him, whatever. He says, I'm going to create an empire. So the Germans, write it down, the Germans will make efforts to get an empire. They will get some colonies in southern Africa. Oh, by the way, right next to British colonies in southern Africa. Ooh. The Germans will get some colonies in the Pacific, not too far away from British colonies in the Pacific. Do you see this? And the French are going, see, Britain, see? I told you to be afraid of this Germans. Look, now they have an empire. And if you're going to have an empire, what are you going to need to have to protect your empire? Big navy. Write it down, right? We saw that with the United States. You need to have a big navy to protect your economic interests and yada, yada, yada. Can the Germans afford, do they have the industrial capacity and the economic power to build a big navy? Yes. So what does Bismarck do? Excuse me, not Bismarck, Wilhelm II. What does he do? He builds a big navy. And the British are like, that's no good. End result, write it down. Britain and France form an alliance. Yeah, because the British are now afraid of what the Germans are up to. Oops. Oops, exactly. Oops. I mean, like, what more could possibly go wrong to mess up Bismarck's carefully laid plans? Austria could drag him into a fight. We're going to get into this next time. How Austria-Hungary, oh my gosh, is that a country? That looks like a smorgasbord. That is... These are all the ethnic national groups in there, and it's actually not enough colors. Because when you get down here, you need like 3 or 4 different colors and so forth to accurately identify all the different nations. It's going to be missed. Next time, we'll get to Austria-Hungary and how Russia gets peeled apart from the alliance with the British, or excuse me, from the Austrians and the Germans, and will become friends with the British and the French. Okay, so we'll pick that up next time. All right.